Hello, welcome to our lesson on floor and ceiling effects in psychological experiments. I really hope na itong topic na ito ay makatulong more on your original experiment that you are currently working on. Now, I would like to give you the following cases. I-pause nyo na lang yung video if you need to, and you work on these cases on your notebook. Let's go to case number 1. An experimental psychologist conducted an experiment on mathematical ability. The psychologist believes that mathematical ability will improve by applying a certain meditation technique. The experimenter used a within-subject design on 40 participants. A standardized mathematical test was given before and after meditation. Set A for baseline and set B for treatment to prevent familiarity effect. Kasi nga, within subjects design ito, so you need to differ the test that you are going to give in the pre-test and the post-test para hindi sila maging familiar at magkaroon ng practice effects in this experiment. So anyway, after getting the data, the baseline and treatment data were compared to each other. The results showed that there was no significant difference before and after the meditation. Specifically, high scores in the baseline data remained high after the meditation was applied. The experimenter then concluded that meditation indeed does not affect mathematical performance. So that's the null hypothesis. Come up with an explanation that will invalidate this conclusion due to ceiling effect. So pag-usapan natin yung ceiling effect for case number 1 later on. Okay? For case number 2, we are working on the floor effect. Okay? So an experimental psychologist conducted an experiment on mathematical ability, but this time, the psychologist believes that mathematical ability will improve by applying a certain meditation technique. The experimenter used a within-subject design on 40 participants. A standardized mathematical test was given before and after meditation. So, ganun din, parang yung naunang case. Set A for baseline and set B for treatment to prevent familiarity or practice effects. After getting the data, the baseline and treatment data were compared to each other. Pero dito sila naiiba, I think. The results showed that there was no significant difference before and after the meditation. The experimenter then concluded that meditation indeed does not affect mathematical performance. Come up with an explanation that will invalidate this conclusion due to floor effect. So, i-apply natin yung konsepto ng ceiling and floor effect in these cases that I presented to you. Okay? Let's start with the first case, the case of ceiling effect. Okay? So, reviewin nyo na lang ulit yung nangyari dito sa case na ibinigay ko. And now, let's discuss how ceiling effect affects psychological experiments. So basically, if you are going to summarize the case that I have given you, ito lang yung experimental question natin. Does meditation X, kung ano man pangalan ng meditation na yon or meditation in general, increase fourth-year college math major students' mathematical ability? And let's say, according to the case na binigay ko kanina, going back, di ba, sinabi naman dito that you are going to use a within subjects design. So if you are going to run this experiment using within subjects design, more or less, ito ang magiging steps mo dyan. Step 1, bibigyan mo ng math test, and that's to get the baseline score, di ba? Now, let's say that the overall average of students' performance in this test is 95%. So, kunin mo yung mga performances ng mga estudyante na kumuha ng test na ito, ang average is 95%. And then step 2, you begin to apply your independent variable, which is your meditation. You teach them how to meditate, and you want to find out kung itong meditation ba na ito will affect their performance in the mathematical test. Step 3, you give them a math test, and this time kaya naka-asterisk yung test dyan. Again, you are going to give a different set of tests. So, yung test na kinuha nila doon sa baseline, it's not the same as the test that they will take in step 3. Again, to prevent any practice effects. But, you have to make sure that the level of difficulty between the test in test 1 or in step 1 is the same as the level of difficulty of the test na kinuha nila doon sa step 3. Now, to make the long story short, sabihin na natin na yung treatment data, yung scores naman nila doon, again, you got the average scores, it gave you a 95%. So basically, given this pattern of results, given this pattern of steps, you are more likely to conclude na walang epekto ang meditation sa kanilang mathematical ability. Kasi if you can see, parehong 95% yung nakuha mong dependent variable, no? So even without running statistica or SPSS, pero kailangan yung i-run pa rin, no? Pero kahit tignan mo pa lang, may masasabi mo na that there are no significant differences between students' performance before they learned meditation or even after they learned meditation. Kahit saan pa sila doon, baseline man sila or sa treatment man sila, their score remains at 95%. So, walang kinalaman, walang epekto yung meditation sa kanilang mathematical performance. But, if you know the concept of ceiling effect, kinakailangan dito pa lang nagsuspect ka na baka merong ceiling effect. The fact that they got 95% performance in this test must raise your suspicion. Magdududa ka na baka merong ceiling effect dito sa experiment na ito. The first question that you really need to ask is, in the first place, bakit mataas ang scores nila doon sa test? I mean, 95% as the average performance of a group is very high. So, ano ang meron doon sa test na ang tataas ng scores nila? Well, tignan mo yung test na ginamit mo to, again, measure your dependent variable. Diba? Ano ba yung test na ginamit natin? Math ability test for first year high school students. So, basically, this test is created or was designed to be taken by first-year high school students. Pero kung re-reviewin mo yung case na binigay ko sa inyo kanina, your participants in the experiment were fourth-year math major college-level students. So there is a big discrepancy between the test that you have used and the participants who participated in your experiment. To make the long story short, to summarize the situation, mukhang masyadong madali yung test na ibinigay mo sa mga participants mo. Again, given the nature of your participants, the test was very easy for them. Maybe, kaya nga meron ako silitang maybe dyan, maybe meron naman talagang epekto yung IV sa DV. It's just that the effect of IV on your DV did not appear, hindi lumabas, simply because the test was too easy. Okay, so sana na-gets nyo yun, no? Posibleng meron naman talagang epekto yung meditation sa math performance. It's just that because the test was too easy for your participants, the effect of your IV on your DV did not appear. Let me use a very simple analogy to again describe to you the concept of ceiling effect. Halimbawa, naghahanap tayo ng mga potential NBA players. As you know, NBA is the best league in the world. So, that means yung mga atleta in the NBA are considered elite athletes. Now, imagine, let's say I go to LaSalle and then I would like to find students who have the potential to play for the NBA. And one way for me to do that is, of course, is to measure their performance based on free throw shooting. Okay? Dahil ito ay NBA, kinakailangan mataas ang standard natin para masabi natin na magaling mag-basketball ang isang estudyante. In other words, ang operational definition natin dapat matindi to make sure that any student that we will pick indeed has the potential to play for the NBA. Okay? Now, this is the way we are going to measure a student's performance. Mag-free throw siya, dapat at least meron siyang 9 out of 10 free throw shooting performance. Sa 10 bola na bibitawan niya, 9 dapat ang papasok. And, take note, ito yung twist, kinakailangan they can do this blindfolded. Any student who can score at least 9 over 10 in this task na naka-blindfold, I would say that this person has the potential to play for the NBA. Pero ito ang twist. Yung size nung ring ng bola, okay, yung pagbabatuhan mo ng bola, yung kanyang diameter is, let's say, 1 kilometer. Can you imagine? 1 kilometer yung diameter. In other words, sobrang laki ng ring. So you can only imagine kung ano ang magiging outcome ng task na ito, no? If I go to LaSalle and then I let all students shoot 10 free throws blindfolded with a ring that big, yung ganong kalaking ring. I'm sure lahat ng itetest ko sa Lasal are qualified to play for the NBA. Diba? In other words, of course, I am exaggerating here, but in that situation that I have given you, masasabi natin na masyadong madali yung task na pinagawa natin sa mga estudyante ng Lasal para malaman natin who can play for the NBA. It is so easy that anyone, even blindfolded, anyone in Lasal can enter NBA because the task that I have given them is simply too easy for them. Yan yung ibig sabihin ng ceiling effect. Now, I am going to use a real-life experiment just to demonstrate to you kung paano ba nakakaapekto yung ceiling effect in psychological experiments. This experiment was done by an experimenter na ang pangalan ay Scarborough. It has nothing to do with the Scarborough Shoal of the Philippine Islands. No, it's just that yan yung pangalan niya, the Scarborough's experiment. Basically, he was asking a very traditional and basic question about memory. So, gusto niyang malaman, what do we remember better? Information in visual form or information in auditory form? Kumbaga sa simpleng Tagalog, ano ba yung mas maaalala ng tao na impormasyon? Yung impormasyon na nakikita niya o yung impormasyon na naririnig niya? So basically, that's what he wants to find out. Ano ba yung mas naaalala ng tao? Visual information or auditory information? Okay, so definitely the dependent variable here would be memory. And the operational definition of Scarborough in this test or in this experiment on memory is the performance of the participants to the Brown-Peterson technique. Para sa mga hindi familiar, Brown-Peterson technique is a technique, a way of measuring how good a person's short-term memory is. Bigyan ko kayo ng example how Brown-Peterson technique is being used. Okay? The Brown-Peterson method is using trigram. Ibig sabihin ng trigram, ito yung mga 3-letter combinations. So imagine you are one of the participants in the experiment. You sit down on a chair and then you look at a blank screen. Habang nakatingin ka sa blank screen, merong lalabas na 3 letra. This is what we call the trigram. And then, mabilis lang yung paglabas niya. It's just a fraction of a second. A fraction of a second, the trigram appears and then disappears. After the trigram disappears, the experimenter will ask you to count backwards by 3 from a certain number. Halimbawa, 794. So, ikaw bilang participant, ang gagawin mo, verbally, you are going to count backwards minus 3 from 794. You are going to orally recite your computation. So, kung ako gagawa nito, halimbawa, mag-count backwards ka. 794 minus 3 is 791, followed by 788, followed by 785, followed by 782, pababa ka ng pababa, minus 3 ka ng minus 3. And you will be doing that in the span of 3 seconds. After 3 seconds that you have been counting backwards, ang ipapagawa sa inyo is you will be asked to recall kung ano yung trigram na nakita mo kanina sa screen. In that case, you need to answer XVG for you to be considered correct. Kasi yun yung lumabas na trigram kanina sa screen. Yan, there you go, XVG. You count backwards minus 3 for 3 seconds and then recall what trigram did you see. Yan yung tinatawag natin Brown-Peterson method. So this is one good way for you to measure your dependent variable on memory. So to summarize, ano yung independent variable ng experiment? We can call it modality. There are 2 modalities in this experiment, visual and auditory modality. Dependent variable is memory. Operational definition of memory is the performance that the participants will have in doing the Brown-Peterson technique. Now, fast forward. Ngayong alam nyo na yung takbo ng experiment, no? So, ang pinagkaiba lang ng levels would be the participants in the first level would be seeing, makikita nila yung trigram. Yung mga participants naman doon sa isang level, naka-headset sila ng ganito, but in that time, in that situation, they will hear. Maririnig nila yung trigram na kinakailangan nilang i-memorize. So, that's the difference. Visual versus auditory. Now, let's talk about the first sets of results. Guess what? Ito yung itsura ng data ni Scarborough. the first time he did this. So, dito pa lang sa graphical representation ng data, kitang-kita nyo na ang conclusion natin is there is no difference between visual information and auditory information. Kahit ano pang presentation mo ng information, visual man yan or auditory man yan, it seems like participants in this experiment are very good in remembering the trigrams. Here's the thing. Posibleng meron naman talagang significant difference between auditory and visual information. Pwedeng meron naman talagang epekto yung modality sa memory recall, hindi lang lumabas. Bakit hindi lumabas? Meron kasing ceiling effect. In fact, paano mo ba maaamoy sa isang experiment na meron ngang ceiling effect? Saan ka dapat magduda? Well, if you look at the data, dito pa lang dapat nagduda ka na. Okay? Nasaan dyan ang dapat mong pagdudahan? Bakit lahat sila ang tataas ng kanilang performance in the different levels? Visual man or auditory man, it seems like the participants are almost acing or perfecting the performance that they have in the test. Kumbaga, kung titignan mo yung data dito, masyado silang magaling. Kumbaga parang madali sa kanila yung task na pinagawa mo. And that could be a problem. Again, pwedeng meron naman talagang epekto yung IV sa DV. It's just that it did not appear because the task that you have given them in the experiment was too easy. That all their scores, all the raw scores that they had, went up to the ceiling. Kaya nga tinawag na ceiling effect. Lahat ng scores na nakuha mo from your dependent variable are all high up in the ceiling. And one of the reasons bakit naging ganun yung pattern ng results mo, the tasks that you have given to your participants are simply too easy. In the experiment by Scarborough, naisip niya yon na baka kaya masyadong matataas yung performance ng mga participants niya in the Brown-Peterson technique was that the Brown-Peterson technique that he used was very easy. So, ang ginawa niya, pinahirap niya ng konti yung Brown-Peterson na pinagawa niya sa kanyang mga participants. Sa tingin niya, yung 3 seconds interval of the participants counting backwards by 3 was very easy. It's very fast na kahit lumipas na yung 3 seconds, maaalala pa rin ng mga participants yung trigram. In other words, the task was too easy, it's not challenging enough. So what Scarborough did was he adjusted the level of difficulty of the task. Pinahirap niya ng konti. From 3 seconds, ginawa naman niyang 7-second interval. So in the original Brown-Peterson, 3 seconds lang yan. Count backwards ka lang ng minus 3. 794, 791, 788, 785, 3 seconds, you stop, and then you recall the trigram. In this case, mas matagal, 7 seconds. So 794, 791, 788, 785, hindi ka titigil hanggat hindi lumulipas ang 7 seconds. So definitely, that is a little bit harder than the Brown-Peterson na 3 seconds lang ang nire-require. And when Scarborough did this adjustment, guess what happened? Lumabas na ngayon yung effect ng IV doon sa dependent variable. It seems like that visual information is remembered better compared to auditory information. So meron naman talagang epekto yung modality sa memory, hindi lang lumabas the first time kasi merong ceiling effect. But right after Scarborough dealt with the ceiling effect, ano nangyari? Lumabas na yung epekto ng IV sa ating dependent variable. So given that example, we can now define ceiling effect as when the independent variable effect on the DV fail to appear because the task that you have given to them in the experiment was simply too easy. So ang tanong ngayon, papaano natin maiiwasan yung ceiling effect sa ating mga experiment? Well, again, you just go back to the instrument or to the task that you are making your participants do. It must be challenging enough. Hindi dapat masyadong madali yung task na ipapagawa mo sa kanila para maiwasan mo yung ceiling effect. And the best way for you to know whether the task or the instrument or any measure that you will use in your experiment para masigurado mong hindi siya masyadong madali, kinakailangan mong i-pilot testing yan. Ibig sabihin ng pilot testing, you are going to administer the task or the test that you are going to use in your experiment to a number of people who are not really participants of your experiment. Kung baga itong grupo ng mga tao na ito, ang role lang nila is to make them experience your instruments for you to find out kung meron ka bang mga dapat baguhin doon sa instrument mo, lalong-lalo na yung level of difficulty. Now, halimbawa nag-pilot testing ka ng instrument mo, let's say to 50 people, paano mo malalaman na yung experiment mo ay masyadong madali? 'Di ba? I mean, what will be your basis to say that there is a problem in your instrument? It's very easy, therefore it can lead to ceiling effect in the future. Actually, magduda ka na kapag nagpa-pilot test ka ng iyong instrument and 75% of your participants of the pilot subjects scored very high in your test. Most likely, masyadong madali yung test mo na yan. You know? So, ibig sabihin, 75% yung mga scores ng participants mo, ng mga pilot subjects mo, 75% of them ang tataas. In other words, if you are going to plot their scores in a normal curve, it will not form a shape of a normal curve. 'Di ba? Magiging skewed to the left yung curve mo. What does that mean? Kapag yung curve nakalobo dito sa kanan, so this is skewed to the left, no? Ibig sabihin yung scores mo nag-accumulate dito sa kanang bahagi ng graph, which tells us that there are many people who scored very high in this test. 'Di ba? Kasi as you move right to this line, it means higher scores. As you move left, it means lower scores. So bumukol doon sa right part ng graph, which tells you that there are many scores that scored very high in this particular test. Pero alam niyo, kung gagamit kayo ng SPSS or ng statistika, there is a way for us to really quantify how normal the curve is. Ito yung tinatawag nating Shapiro-Wilk test. Tinitignan ng Shapiro-Wilk test kung yung distribution ba ng scores na nakuha mo from your participants forms more or less a shape of the normal curve. And again, take note, that's what you want to see. Gusto mo talagang makita na yung scores ng participants mo sa pilot test mo is assuming the shape of the normal curve. Now, using the Shapiro-Wilk test, how would you know kung okay ba yung distribution ng scores? Kung yung scores ba ng pilot subjects mo are assuming the shape of the normal curve, titignan mo yung SIG or the significance. Now, this time, you would like the SIG to be greater than 0.05. Again, in this instance, see, if you are going to test the normality of the pilot scores, no, para ma-conclude mo kung tama lang ba yung difficulty ng instrument mo, you would like the SIG to be above 0.05. Kasi ang ibig sabihin, kapag yung SIG na nakita mo dyan is less than 0.05, what does that say? The shape of the scores distribution is significantly different from a normal curve. Meaning, hindi ka pwede magpatuloy ng experiment with that kind of a shape of the normal curve. So again, you would like to see the SIG of the Shapiro-Wilk test to be greater than 0.05. So yun yung gusto nating makita. Now, kapag nakita mo na o nakuha mo na yung number na yan, it's greater than 0.05, that means your instrument is okay to be used. It's a good to go. Pwede mo na siyang gamitin. That means it's not too easy for your participants because that means yung scores nila well distributed. Merong mga matataas, merong mga average, meron din naman mga bumagsak. So your instrument is good to go. Okay? Now, pag-usapan natin yung kabaliktaran ng ceiling effect, which is floor effect. Basically, I just used the same case. It's just that in this case, gusto ko lang ipasok yung konsepto ng floor effect. So, paano ba nangyayari yung floor effect? Basically, kabaliktaran lang yan ng ceiling effect. Ceiling, bubong sa taas. Yung floor, nasa baba. So, floor effect happens when the independent variable appears not to affect your dependent variable. But the reason is, again, has something to do with the task that you have given your participants, but this time, it's possible that the task that you have given your participants or the test that you have used is too hard for the participants. So, paano mo ulit malalaman yan? If 75% of your participants fail a test, fail a performance task in the laboratory, then maybe the task that you are using or the test that you are administering is very hard to your participants. Let's apply floor effect to the study by Scarborough na pinag-aralan natin kanina, di ba? I mean, let's talk about the Brown-Peterson method. So, nung in-adjust ni Scarborough yung time interval from 3 seconds to 7 seconds, ano nangyari? Lumabas yung epekto. No? So, the task became a little bit harder, which is good kasi nakita natin na meron palang effect yung modality sa dependent variable. But just to demonstrate to you the floor effect, paano magkakaroon ng floor effect in this study, mas pahihirapan pa natin yung Brown-Peterson method. Diba? Remember, ano ang nagpalabas sa effect ng IV sa DV in this experiment? Yung 7 seconds. So, 7 seconds is just fine. It's not too hard, not too easy. Now, since we are talking about floor effect, ang dapat nating gawin dito sa Brown-Peterson method na ito, mas pahirapin pa natin. Yung parang imposible ng ma-accomplish pa o makatama pa ng mga sagot yung mga participants in this Brown-Peterson method. And there are many ways how to do that. Kung paano mo mas pahihirapan yung task na pinapagawa mo. And one way to do that is to increase the interval. Imagine niyo from 7 seconds, gawin nating 45 seconds yung interval ng Brown-Peterson method. Magka-count ka ng backwards minus 3 for 45 seconds before you try to recall the trigram. I'm pretty sure that is too hard for participants to do. Diba? Kapag i-increase mo yung interval in 45 seconds, another way to make the Brown-Peterson method a little bit harder or very hard is instead of using a trigram, ang ipamemorize mo hexagram. Pag hexagram, ibig sabihin 6 na letra yung ipapamemorize mo. Again, if you do this step, I believe, halos walang participants mo ang makakascore ng maayos in this task. Diba? In fact, I would expect your results to be this way. Halos walang nakakatama or walang nakakapasa in the task that you are letting them do. So that's what you mean by floor effect. So, ang floor effect, magdududa ka na meron yan kapag most of the scores of your participants are very low or are failing. Walang pumapasa doon sa task na pinapagawa mo. One possibility, baka masyadong mahirap in the first place yung pinapagawa mo sa kanila. So, just like in ceiling effect, ano ang dapat mong gawin para maiwasan ang floor effect? Ipapilot test mo na naman yung instrument mo o yung task na ipapagawa mo in the experiment. And then after you do that, you collect the scores and then you find out kung yung mga scores ba na nakuha mo from your pilot test assumes the shape of the normal curve. Again, there is a way on how to quantify this. Gagamit ka ng Shapiro-Wilk test. Diba? If the Shapiro-Wilk test tells you that the significance of your score is not is greater than 0.05, then that means your instrument or your task in the laboratory is good to go. It's not too easy, it's not too hard. Pero yun na nga, since we are talking about ceiling effect, kapag may ceiling effect, yung bulto ng scores, yung bulk ng scores will be found towards the left side of the line, which tells you there are many students who failed the test or the task that you let them do in the laboratory. So to summarize everything that I've told you so far, hindi maganda ang ceiling effect at ang floor effect. 'Di ba? Mga ano to, no? Mga variables ito or mga events ito na dapat nating iwasan. Because if your experiment has floor effect or ceiling effects, it might cause you to come up with erroneous conclusions. Most likely, yung error na makukumit mo dyan is a false, tama ba? False negative. Ibig sabihin ng false negative, sinabi mong walang epekto yung IV sa DV, pero sa totoo meron naman pala. Hindi lang lumabas yung epekto ng IV sa DV because of floor and ceiling effect. So para maiwasan natin ang floor and ceiling effect, we need to pilot test our instruments. Question, saan mo o kanino mo ipapapilot test yung iyong instrument? Again, from or towards people who are willing to answer your test or who are willing to participate in a task that you will be using in an experiment. Pero ang rule is, I know a lot of you will ask me, no, sir, yung mga ginamit ba namin ng mga participants doon sa pilot test, pwede ba namin silang gamitin as our subjects or participants later on when we already run the real experiment? The answer is no. Oo. So, ang norm in doing experiment is the participants in the pilot test must be different from participants in the actual experiment. Yun ang rule natin. And again, to avoid floor and ceiling effects, you would like to see that the scores that your participants are getting from the test that you have given them must be spread out. Kinakailangan well distributed. It assumes the shape of the normal curve. Yung iba mataas ang score, yung iba average, yung iba bumagsak. Gusto mo well distributed yung scores ng mga participants mo towards your task or towards the test that you have used. So more or less dapat ina-assume ng distribution ng scores mo yung shape ng normal curve. But then again, there is a more quantitative way of doing that. Gagamit ka ng Shapiro-Wilk test of normality. Now, I know a lot of you are asking me, given this discussion about floor and ceiling effect, sir, required ba kami na i-pilot test yung aming instruments to make sure na walang floor or ceiling effect? My answer to that question is, I highly encourage it. Sorry, no, this is typographical. Dapat ito highly encouraged, no? O sige, palitan na rin natin. Highly encouraged. There you go. Yan. Nakakaya naman sa inyo. Baka ayaw nyo nag-aaral ng may mga wrong grammars, no, or misspelling. Anyway, so it's highly encouraged but it's not required. Okay? Kasi, again, because we don't have the luxury of time, everything is online, malaking bagay ang kakainin na oras kapag nagpa-pilot test ka pa. That's why if you notice, yung lecture na ito binigay ko ngayon, not before you run the experiment because hindi ko na masyadong ipapa-require sa inyo yung pilot testing phase because I think masyado yang kakain ng oras nyo. We have a very limited time this term. So again, you are highly encouraged to do this if you have the luxury of time or kung sinisipag kayo, sa tingin nyo abot naman kayo, you can do it, but again, it's not required. But for those of you who will not be doing pilot testing, dapat at the back of your head, lagi mong pagdududahan yung data nyo later on, whatever that is, na baka meron siyang floor or ceiling effect because you did not pilot tested your instrument. In fact, what I would recommend you to do is ilagay nyo na lang yon sa recommendations part ng inyong video presentation. So one of the things that you will recommend for future researchers to do is future researchers, kung i-replicate man yung study nyo, one way to do it or one adjustment that they need to make is to pilot test the instruments first that you have used in your experiment. Okay? So, yun ang sagot ko sa tanong na yan. Hindi naman siya required, but you are highly encouraged. But, again, if you think in the future, meron kang floor or ceiling effect in your data, then maybe you can just put that in recommendations or limitations of the study. So there you go. I hope you learned something tonight about floor and ceiling effects. Kayo nang bahala if you are going to incorporate this lesson to the original experiment that you are working on right now. Kung may oras pa kayo o wala, you just decide. Alright? So thank you for listening. I'm going to upload one more video regarding how to generalize conclusions in an experiment. But for the meantime, you just focus on this video muna. Thank you for listening and God bless.